Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Task Force to Reimagine Policing in Brookline. This is our meeting for January 22nd, 2021. Still getting used to that. And I'm Raul Fernandez, Chair of the Task Force and Select Board member. We've got some updates we'll be doing this meeting, some meeting minutes to approve, and we start every meeting with any updates from just personal updates from members of the commission, of the task force. Does anybody have anything they'd like to share at the top? Malcolm.
Yeah, so I just want to, in a very public and a recorded fashion, say, I stand with you, Raul. The stuff from the police union is incredibly problematic, and it makes me wonder about the analytical and detective and investigative skills of our police department, considering, right before you, another select board member said essentially the same thing you did. And then right following after you, another select board member endorsed what you said. And then a fourth added to what you said. And you're the one who gets isolated and preyed upon, frankly. And especially when, we have had other select board members do other things that, in my opinion, have been way more egregious, involving themselves in school personnel things, involving themselves in other, criteria that doesn't particularly fit into their purview. And so I was appalled at what I saw in the letter from the police union, as well as what I saw on a recorded video from this select board meeting. And I need that to be public. I need that to be heard. I am at the point in living in Brookline long enough where I have former Pop Warner coaches on the police, as well as people I grew up with, as well as former students and athletes that I coached. And I think all of them know I don't hate the police. I think all of them know that that was an incredibly horrible miscarriage of justice when someone who's been at a lot of these meetings slandered you by saying you've been leading this committee through defunding the police. And as a townie, as someone whose parents literally fought to be here, who had to sue realtors to get here in the 70s, that was an embarrassment for the entire town. And I just want that to be public.
Appreciate you, Malcolm. Thank you. Anyone else? Eitan?
Well, I don't really know what the context of Malcolm's comment, so I would like to learn more about that. I don't think we ever had a chance to publicly follow up with Mel from a few weeks ago about a police officer who used the Brookline email address and seemed to purposely mischaracterize the work of town task force. So I was wondering if we get both an update from Mel and also an update just to just bring us all up to speed on what Malcolm was talking about.
Sure thing. Mel, would you like to go first? And you're muted. Yep.
Of course. I tried to explain the last time that, my position, I work for the select board. I don't talk about investigations or internal matters at a task force meeting like this. I won't do it, but I'm happy to work through the select board on that and take their direction on that. They're the appointing authority. I'm not going to talk about that. I will indicate that there is investigation going on the use of the town's social media or internet, and it's a serious one. I thought I said that the last time, but again, I'm just not comfortable talking about internal investigation of an employee or employees at this task force.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to let me just respond to that by saying this is exactly why this that we need oversight in a serious way, and why over 3/4 of respondents to our survey want this kind of action to be in the public domain with civilian oversight, so that in the future, when we have a problem like this, there is public accountability and a public discussion of all disciplinary matters. Because I mean, for one thing, there is a supermajority support for this in the town of Brookline, just surveyed. So I understand your answer, Mel. I just wanted to just use this opportunity to say, this is exactly what we don't want to have happen on an ongoing basis.
Well, I would encourage you to communicate that to the board. I will most certainly convey your thoughts to them.
Right. Thanks, Eitan. Thanks, Mel. Eitan, to answer your other question, it's difficult for me to sort of talk about this being the subject of some of this, but essentially 2 select board meetings ago, I shared some thoughts on the Capitol riots, not unlike the thoughts that I shared here at our task force meeting, more, the day after those riots and that insurrection. A week passed without incident, and then the police union, made some public comments at our select board meeting with a lot of misinformation and lies and things like that about what I did say, which is on the record, available to watch. It's in the minutes, so folks are welcome to find that. And then subsequently, over the last days since, I've received many calls, emails, direct messages, unsolicited, all of them, with some pretty horrible things said by people, anonymously, of course. So that's what Malcolm's referencing. Not the first time something like this has happened. But it maybe is the first time that that some of our own are responsible for it. And so we'll figure it out in due course. But I'll just mention, I remain unintimidated, and we're doing, I think, a really important work, and that if, again, I've said this, I can't tell you how many times, but I tell people, watch us work, and you'll see that what some folks are saying about the work that's happening here is completely just fabricated. There's not an ounce of truth to it, and it's unfortunate when there are folks who are tuned into what we're doing who are mischaracterizing this work. So I'll leave it at that. We're doing good work. We'll keep doing it. And Lonnie.
I just want to reflect what I see in this incident is that, I see the police department and the union steering away from condemning white supremacy, racism, and fascism, while spending a whole lot of time being offended by someone who is condemning white supremacy, racism, and fascism. And it's not a good look, saying that condemning the presence of someone who would align themselves with a president in this moment after the Capitol attack would be a danger. Saying that an officer that aligns themselves in that way would be a danger to our Black and Brown and Jewish communities it makes a lot of sense. But the police officers are saying that saying that makes the police officers, puts them in danger somehow. And that is just this gross twisting of what's actually happening. And I just want to point that out, that a simple solution would be to condemn what happened there instead of spending all this time making room so that whoever those officers may or may not be have a space to continue on in the police department.
Thanks, Bonnie. Okay. I'll let you know how things are going. We'll I don't want to spend too much time on some of these folks and just move into the work. Anyone have anything else they'd like to share? Right. Let's get into it. We do have first the question of approving the minutes from Friday, January 15th. Anybody have any updates or anything they'd like to add to the minutes there? Okay, let's go ahead and go through approval. The usual thing. We'll go across. First person I see, all in favor of approving the meeting minutes, say aye. Kristen?
Yes.
Okay, Bonnie?
Yes.
Malcolm?
Yes.
Alexander?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Chi-Chi?
Yes.
Anne?
Yes.
Eitan? Kimberly?
Yes.
And I think it's me. Yes. All right, great. Eitan, do you have any updates on the policing survey? I know we'll be hearing more from you about it next week, but any updates between now and then?
We have successfully, I think, I just got word from a research assistant who de-identified the some of the open-ended responses to the survey. So probably Monday or Tuesday, I'm just going to put together a final public file, which is just going to be the raw data with the redacted open-ended. I mean, not all the open-ended are redacted, just if they were potentially identifying. We were fairly cautious on the de-identification. If a person mentioned like the street that they live on and things that are fairly specific, that in combination with the stuff that's in the survey, like demographics, age, whatever, it could be identifying, we redacted it. So we'll have always a permanent record of the unredacted one, and then we'll have the public redacted one. I'll share that with about a 12-page write-up that I've written that essentially is similar in structure and theme to the presentation I gave, and then the questionnaire itself. So my aim is to get that to folks on Monday or Tuesday. And again, as I said, if you have questions or want a different look at the data, just to let me know before or after.
Thanks. And Eitan, what's the we know that we got some more responses. What's the sort of where we are now, the number of total responses we've gotten to the survey so far?
Yeah, we're at I think it's like something like 1350. So we're still in the 5 to 6% range of response rates. Yep. I can go back and look.
That's about right.
Yeah. So that's where we are. As before, we have overrepresentation of white respondents, overrepresentation of well-educated respondents, underrepresentation of racial minorities, particularly Asian Americans, who we didn't oversample. We have many more Asian American respondents than, say, African American, Latino respondents because of the population size within the town, but they're underrepresented relative to their population in the town. So anyway, so we have we use the weights when we're looking at the full population of the town, and we look and also in racial subgroups.
Great. And I will tell you that there are the sheer number of free written responses actually surprised me, like the number of people that actually took the time to write something. And I think folks were asked about negative experiences, positive experiences, and then I think, was it anything else they'd like to add? Is that right, Eitan? Yeah, and so there's a lot of rich data in there in addition to what we've seen before, but it's important to complete this de-identification process. There are, in some cases, like Eitan said, people mentioning things that make them easily identifiable, at least to those who would know, not necessarily to any one of us, and also individual police officer names as well. And so that work is important.
In the spirit of the first conversation before we really started, my research assistant, who's an undergraduate from New Jersey, said he really got a flavor of the opinionated nature of the Brookline community. Everyone seemed to have opinion about the survey, about everything.
That's very true. Very true. Eitan, thank you. Kristen.
I'm just curious to know, thank you for the update. I'm just curious to know, do the written responses that we have, are they coming from Black and brown people who completed the survey? I'm just wondering if there's an overlap between respondents and folks who have written comments.
Are you saying, like, are they more likely to have written responses?
Whether more likely or not, I'm just curious to know whether or not they are providing written responses, because that is, I think, some of the detail that we're looking for. And so I'm just, of the 50 or so that you told us about who responded to the survey, I'm curious to know what the incidence is of written comments among those folks who responded.
I don't know the answer offhand, but I'm happy to just like give you as like a CSV file of all written responses from African American and Latino identifiers. Should I do that?
I see some heads nodding yes. Let's go ahead and do that. Thank you. Any other questions here? Yeah, I'll just add that this is, I think this is going to end up being a really important part of our report, because it complements in many ways the work that's happening at the various subcommittees. And I've been in, we're going to do some subcommittee updates in a minute, but I've been, at almost all of those meetings recently. And, one of the things that I keep seeing is, well, the things that subcommittees are working towards, with regard to the recommendations are grounded, not purposefully, but, they match up, they align well with the results that we got from the survey itself, which tells us that this is a group of people that represent the community, because they're, your recommendations are right in alignment with what we're getting from the survey from a broad array of residents. I mentioned this before. One of the key things that sticks out to me is that residents of all races, but when we look at the total response, overwhelmingly support limiting the scope of police department duties, completely support the police responding to crime, particularly, the so-called Part A crimes, these violent crimes, things like that. But otherwise limiting the scope of their duties, limiting their powers as well, and we'll see that in the survey. But also increasing, as Eitan mentioned earlier, transparency to a great deal, to a great degree, and also accountability as well. And all parts of that I see in your subcommittee work as well. So
can I just add one thing that I think is just really important, reflecting on the previous conversation, which is that in many circumstances like this, we have in the study of politics, the kind of thing where people are very appreciative and supportive of what's going on in their community, but critical of the rest of the country. Like, I like my member of Congress, but not Congress. I like my school and my teachers, but not teachers. Here, actually, it's very clear that there is a widespread acknowledgement among a representative sample of the community that we have a problem of racial discrimination in the Brookline Police Department and a problem of accountability in the Brookline Police Department. It's not policing in general or national policing. It is the Brookline Police Department. And to me, I didn't go into this survey thinking one way or the other about what the community input would be on that front, but it's very clear.
Thanks, Eitan. So more on that next week. You'll have should we call it the final report, Eitan, next week? Is that what we're looking at? Yeah.
Final one I'm writing. Yeah.
It's gotta be, right? So we'll have the final report available. I would encourage, I'll say this, for folks in the audience, I would encourage you to, there are various subcommittee reports in draft form right now. We had a draft version of the survey, or at least parts of the survey, shared on social media, not by a member of the task force that could provide context, or not with relevant context, and also the fact that all the numbers needed to be updated there. Please feel free to share final versions of things, and you can do whatever you want. You're all members of the public, right? But feel free to share final versions of things that have the proper context, with them, But early versions or draft versions, I think, help no one, to share those kinds of things out in those kinds of forums. So again, do what you will. You're members of the public, and these are all public documents. But while they're in draft form, it's putting us in a position where we have to respond to all these different questions. We are going to have draft reports from all the subcommittees and ultimately the task force. As we'll hear in a second, all the subcommittees are lining up their public meetings to actually take public comment on this. That's going to be the proper forum for it. And the task force also will have a draft report. We'll take public comments on that report, and then we'll produce a final report. And of course, that's going to go through a lot of public process as well, most notably at the select board, however many meetings they want to have on that. We want to have on that. All right, so I'm going to stop there and move on to our subcommittee updates. Let's go ahead and get started with our vulnerable people and people in crisis subcommittee.
Hi, I'll start, I guess. And Alex, feel free to add in. Oh, and wait, Amal's is here. Hi, Amal's. I thought you weren't coming, so good to see you. So we're working on our final report, and we're working on inviting folks to our public forum meeting 2 weeks from yesterday. February 4th, I think it is. And just kind of putting the report in order, finalizing our recommendations, and looking ahead to next steps.
I just had a question about the public hearing. Like, do we have to have a specific time? Like, are people doing it like an hour or an hour and a half, or just, wanting to make sure about that? Well, you're on mute.
All right, I don't know who's doing that. It's not me. Devin. No, it's probably not. So I would set aside as much time as possible. One of the things that I like to do in a public hearing is make sure that we hear from everyone that shows up. What you can do is, and you should do, is make sure to figure out a time limit for comments. If you get only 10 people showing up to make comments, then you don't necessarily need a strict 2 or 3 minute time limit, I don't think. If you get 50 people that want to make comments, you better, or you're going to be there until the next day. So, I would, if you're able to, I would set aside a minimum of 90 minutes, an hour and a half, for that meeting, with potentially, some availability to go longer if need be. I'm not sure to what extent people are going to be interested in the various subcommittee, sort of presentations and opportunities for public comment. I'm not sure yet, but I'd leave as much time as possible. And we want to make sure that if someone has something to say, that they have an opportunity to say it. So, again, one of the things you can do is look at the participant count, and then adjust accordingly. And usually people are able to say what it is they want to say, certainly within 3 minutes. I've seen public comment where folks are limited to 2 minutes, but I think 3 gives a little bit more flexibility for people to sort of speak their mind. If that helps. Mike, can you weigh in here? I know you've led a lot of these.
Yeah, 3 minutes is, you heard last night, there are some people who in 3 minutes can repeat their point about 5 times. I think most of the points we're here will certainly fit very well within that and give somebody an opportunity to explain and give us something to comment on.
Right. Certainly you also, if you want, can ask clarifying questions of someone that's making a comment. It's, I certainly would not go down the road of, at least not very much, unless someone is sharing just complete disinformation, going back and forth with someone who's sharing comments. But if you'd like further clarification on something they said, that might actually help us produce a better report, then certainly you can do that, but just be aware that eats into the time for further public comment.
Thanks.
So I just want to flag, so our public meeting will be on Thursday, February 4th at 6 p.m. for the Vulnerable People Subcommittee. And our draft is chugging along. If you're interested in having a look at it while it's in progress, the link to that, the Google document, is on our subcommittee website.
Great. Any questions for these folks? All right. I was in the most recent meeting. You're doing really great work, and the draft's really coming along there. So looking forward to that. And after all the subcommittee meetings, I want to talk about, I know there was an idea to be able to sort of put together in one document, maybe an email that could be shared, all of the different dates and times for all of the public hearings. So I want to make sure that we get to that before we close our subcommittee updates. But let's hear from everybody else and see where they are first.
I forgot one thing I wanted to say. There is, Toronto or Ontario is in the process of reimagining their crisis support services for the city of Toronto, as well as just services and supports for vulnerable people in general. And I did have Devin attach to our meeting materials today some of the documents that are coming out of their work, just in case people are interested in looking at it. It's very thorough. They have links to a lot of the materials that they use to conceptualize their own services and supports and reimagining. And I thought it was worth sharing with everybody in case you wanted to take a deep dive.
Great, thank you. Devin also mentions to us in the chat that that we should, because not everybody will be able to make the times when we do these hearings, and people should be able to comment on our work, but that we can ask that folks send written public comment, either in addition to their verbal, public comment that they give during the meeting, or instead of, if they can't make it. And that way we can get more comments. They can be emailed. Let's go with Devin, because then Devin can easily share those with other with the task force without any OML concerns, and then they can be captured in the sort of the packet and the minutes and those kinds of things. So we'll make sure that we provide that as an option as well when we share the information about the public hearings, that we also include this is how you can write us as a task force and share your thoughts with us if you can't make the hearing. Okay, let's go with the Walk and Talk Subcommittee.
Ooh, okay. Anne and Kimberly, if you could support whatever I'm putting out there, because there's a lot. It's been a week with the Walk and Talk. So we began this week with an interview of Matthew Baronis, who is the Assistant Director of the Brookline Housing Authority and the Director of Management there. He has been in that position since 1988 and has the institutional knowledge of the entirety of the Walk and Talk program. He was there in the beginning and is still there. And we interviewed Mr. Baronis in the hopes of getting a clearer idea of the history of the Walk and Talk program that's been fuzzy thus far, the origins and the reasons why it started. We haven't yet nailed down the reasons, or haven't had really directly been told what made the program happen. But what was interesting was that we learned that Chief O'Leary, Mr. Baronis said that he was chief at the time, but it seems that Chief O'Leary was not chief until 1995, but was still very involved in the beginning of this program, with Mark Morgan, who was the chief at the time that was just about to leave. He was just about to move
No,
on from that position, but he was still chief.
Mark Morgan.
What's that?
I don't think he was chief.
No,
but
I'm sorry. He
he
was
was a fellow
detective. I'm
detective.
sorry. Yes.
He's now acting
Yes.
chief.
Yes. At the time, the chief was George Samard, and
Right.
he was retiring. He retired in August of that year, 1991, I believe. So you don't need to have that whole thing, but there was Chief O'Leary, who was a lieutenant at the time, Mark Morgan, who was a detective at the time, and the chief, George Samard, who are the three people that brought this into existence, along with Mr. Baronis on the side of the BHA. So we were surprised by that, to hear that Chief O'Leary was a part of that, considering we've had these discussions this whole time trying to figure out how and why this program started. So we were able to call O'Leary into our meeting yesterday to have a conversation about that. And I'm flipping between my notes here.
Wednesday, but yeah.
Wednesday, yes. I'm struggling here, Anne, so if you can,
Okay.
you can pull up.
I am too.
That'd be great.
I'm trying to, between the two of us, we'll get it.
Okay.
We were able to ask Chief O'Leary to join us in our walk and talk meeting on Wednesday, to ask him about the origins of the program. We were surprised that we had never heard of Mr. O'Leary's involvement before this week. And I don't know, Chief, if you want to weigh in here, but basically what we heard was that the Brookline Police Department was looking to do more community policing work, that it was sort of the thing happening at the time. And that, if I think I'm getting this right, that Chief Samard asked Mr. O'Leary and Mark Morgan to develop a program for Brookline Housing Authority, and that the executive director of the BHA was also somehow, I think, a little involved in the development, but that it was mostly from the BPD. And that's how it began. That Chief O'Leary and Mark Morgan basically developed the idea, presented it to the chief, and presented it at Brookline Housing Authority, got approval, and that's how it began. And originally it was 2 officers, and now it's 3. And
I can fill in that. Yes, it is. That's basically how it began. I was a lieutenant at the time. I was in the detective division. Chief Samad called me in one day and said that he and Brian Clunan wanted to involve the police more in housing. Brian Clunan was the executive director of the housing. And he asked me if I could come up with an idea, or if I had any ideas on how that could take place. So I spoke with Mark Morgan, and the 2 of us talked, and we came up with an idea of getting, I don't know if we proposed the name. I don't remember that. Probably not. But we wanted to commit officers to housing, just like eventually we were doing around the department, was to commit officers to their own routes and pick 2 officers and work with housing, work with the site managers, and start the program. I did pitch that, or say that, to the chief. I don't remember my role as being extremely extremely essential to making the program what it is, what it became, because my responsibility was in the detective division. They walk and talk, I think, initially came under the patrol division, which I did not work in. But I did, that was my role to get it going.
Thank you.
No, I didn't bring it up here, and it goes back to me trying to keep myself in the middle. You studying the program as it is today, not as it was back in the early 90s when I had a role in getting it started. So, and if you know me,
That was what was so surprising to us, is that we hadn't heard anything.
Well, I don't know if a good place came up to bring that up without it sounding a little bit defensive, as people have accused me of being. So I stayed. I purposely didn't say it. But that's how my involvement was with the program.
And it seemed to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it was specifically developed to work with youth in Brookline Housing Authority. Is that a fair statement, that it seemed directed at young people?
I think that was a large role, yes.
Okay, thanks.
And like I told you at the meeting, the first two officers that were in there, one grew up in the Point section of Brookline.
Right.
And pretty sure the second one grew up in public housing. And they were put in there and make relationships with the kids, the people, and then to work with the site managers.
Thanks.
We've got a couple folks that'd like to ask questions. I don't know if you want to continue on or take those questions.
Well, just to wrap up the conversations that we were having, which leads into some of our findings, is that what keeps coming up over and over again in these situations is that the word providing social services is the reason why officers are there right now, to provide support for children, to support mentorship, to support, to do problem solving in the community, to do, all of these things, which every community needs. Every community needs their children to be supported, to have access to, all kinds of things. But this is being placed very specifically in public housing. And so we have been trying very hard to get it articulated, like why in this moment, 1991, 92, was something happening that would make this come and make this to be put into existence. And that hasn't been nailed down, for me at least, as satisfyingly. So we're doing a lot of research in that to try and figure out the history of what's happening in Brookline in 1991 and 92 in the context, political context, all kinds of things, to try and piece together what it looks like, because we can't seem to get a very clear answer of why in this moment this would start, aside from this being a new way to think about policing, but policing poor people specifically. So we're working on that as one aspect of our findings. And if at any point I'm incorrect in that, or if anyone has a clarifying from the police department, has a clarifying reason why in this moment that public housing is why gets dedicated police officers, I would love to hear it. But until then, we're going to be building the context around it.
Bonnie, if I could interrupt, you have to understand the way policing came about and was turning around to committing officers to their routes so they could get one officer in one area of the town, to know what goes on in the route. And that was the feeling across the board. And I told you that, and I think other people have said it too, is that public housing, the walk and talk, is not the only group that is committed to one area of the town.
But again,
we have officers assigned walking Coolidge Corner.
yes, but I live in Brookline and no one has offered me social services. And you don't know me. You don't know what situation my family's in.
I didn't say that I did, but you asked me, you're saying that Brookline Police committed only officers to public housing to poor people. And that was never brought up in any conversation.
No, what I'm saying is,
I don't ever remember words coming out of my mouth or somebody that was at a meeting to talk about poor people getting more policing.
well, because the word poor doesn't need to happen when you say public housing.
I didn't say that, you said it.
But there is
I didn't say that. I didn't say that back then. I was asked to come up with an idea to get officers into the community. It was at the request of the chief, and he told me that Brian Clunan was involved as well, who was the director of housing. What their conversations were about, I don't know. I'm not privy to. But when I asked and I said about bringing those officers into the BHA, it was not to police poor people.
So what was it for?
What was it
for? I told you, you're going in there, you're developing relationships with kids, you're giving them role models, you're getting things going, you're giving them a leg up, you get them to see what police officers are like, and you move forward.
And why they're
Okay, folks, I think.
Yeah, this is.
I'm cutting everybody off right now. Chief included.
Okay, but I just want to leave with the message. It was going on around town. It was not just in public housing.
So just to wrap this up, this is the moment where we're trying to contextualize what's happening, because that is not something, that's not a satisfying answer for me particularly.
Well, I don't know how to answer it.
Right.
Okay.
So we've got a couple questions here. I just weigh in here briefly. I think there are lots of reasons why it, particularly in the 90s and during other time periods, there were programs put into place. A lot of it, it seems went under the banner of community policing. But we also now historically know that a lot of things that might have been intended to be good, intended to be a way to better engage, perhaps, from the police side with communities of color, with low-income communities, actually backfired in a major way. And it backfired. We see the results in the legacy of our criminal justice system. We see the results in stop and frisk. We see the results in all these other ways that that police presence in low-income communities has actually not benefited communities of color. In fact, the exact opposite. And I think I don't, for me, I don't know. I don't see the need to engage in a debate about what happened in 1990, whatever, because I think we can now look back and recognize that programs like this have had detrimental impacts. I mean, that's pretty widely known at this point. I don't even think it's, maybe it's debatable, but it's pretty widely known that those kinds of programs, that putting more police in communities where communities of color and low-income communities has not been beneficial to those communities. I mean, is there debate about that? I don't think there is.
I would say you're talking about it, programs in general. Is that what you're saying about the walk and talk program?
Right. Well, I mean, it's not me saying it. I mean, there've been members from the public housing community, residents who live in public housing who have said as much. So it's not me saying it necessarily about the walk and talk program. We've heard that from members of the community.
So it's all negative reports from the community.
No. I'm not saying that at all. No, there are certainly people.
I think it should be expressed that there's two sides to every story. There's
there
a lot of
absolutely will be.
A lot of people I think that were helped. There's
Right.
a lot of people that saw a good outcome.
Right.
It was not a prison. It was not a pipeline to prison like maybe some people like to think of it as. It was not that.
All right. Yeah, there's no question. I think when we see our final report, all of that will be there. That there are certainly people that support and have found benefit from the program. I think that much is clear. And yet still there are others who are deeply concerned about the program, who haven't had those benefits. And I think this is one of the things we have to do with all of our programs. And I'm sorry, I'm going to turn over to Malcolm in a second to ask a question or comment. This is one of the things we have to do with all of our programs is say, do the cost outweigh the benefits, right? Because we could have the same conversation in Brookline. Most people in Brookline have not had an overwhelmingly negative experience with the police. Does that mean we should change nothing? Of course not. The number of people that have had negative experiences with the police department should be 0, right? As I remember Aton pointing out previously. And so we've got to do a sort of weigh things out. This is not something is all good or something is all bad. We just don't live in that world. It's going to be about weighing out the benefits to some versus the cost to others, and whether or not those programs, any of them, sort of clear that hurdle. And so I think there's no question, and I'll make sure this is reflected in our reporting out, particularly to the select board, that there's no question that there are people that get benefit from any number of services that the police department currently provides. But we know that there are folks that are deeply concerned about and have been deeply impacted by some of those very same services. Malcolm.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to bring some local and national historical perspective to this. In 1978, Brookline loses a court juncture because they were having racist practices in terms of who they allowed into Brookline public housing. And so for the majority of the time while I was in school, up until I graduated in 18, an overwhelming majority of the people in public housing were white. And I remember coming back as a teacher being shocked to see the change in terms of people of color in public housing. In particular, even my sister's grade, who's 4 years younger than me, had more. My sister graduated in 92. And so I don't think that's a mistake. That all of a sudden in the early 90s, as the public housing becomes more and more people of color, now all of a sudden there's a different attention. I would also like to put it in the context of what was going on in the early 90s that precipitated a lot of community policing, particularly white police reaching out to Black communities. Rodney King is the famous national one. The more local one is the Stewart case, where the white guy drove into Mission Hill and shot his wife and said it was a Black guy, and Boston police kind of ravaged through. And as much as Brookline wants to, sometimes separate and then incorporate Boston into their plans, these are national things. And it's almost exactly what we see in the school resource officer as well, that it follows these national trends and Brookline picks up on them. I do find it interesting that that's when this is happening in conjunction with federal monies that are connected to this and other things. And so I'm just pushing those historical facts out there that work in conjunction with this.
Thank you, Malcolm. Kristen.
Thank you. I'll turn off my camera if the audio gets bad, so just let me know. I think there's two things that I was hoping we could just not lose the opportunity to think about. The first is there's some connections to what we've been trying to do on the SRO subcommittee, which is bringing out the history. There are a number of practices that are continuing based on history that we don't understand particularly well. We've had to do that work to try to surface that history, and it feels important then, if there's another opportunity to make that history present, that we take that opportunity with this group of folks that are convened together to make sure that we understand it before we continue a set of practices that are problematic for a number of folks. The second thing that I want us to consider is that I worry we lose sight of the cumulative effect of what policing feels like for folks. If you are in public housing and there are police present in the building or the community there. And then you go to school and there are police present in the community or building there. And then you are driving and you run the risk of experiencing over-policing or bias in policing. The accumulative effects of those independent choices or where we place officers and how they go about the practice of policing has disparate effects on folks. And I just worry we're losing sight of the cumulative and interdependent and systemic effects of all of those choices.
Thank you, Kristen. Anything else from this subcommittee or any other questions or comments relative to it? All right, keep working. All right, next up, school resource officers. Subcommittee.
Hello, everyone. We are engaging in really good conversations around our report, and we're starting to dig into drafting this week. Michael Downey got back to us with some thoughts about the statutory requirements under the new law, so we'll talk about that hopefully at our next meeting. As always, the link to our Google Doc where we are and will be drafting is on our subcommittee website. And if you want to come to our public meeting where we'll be reviewing that report, that should be Tuesday, February 2nd at 1 p.m. Taking another quick look through, we're talking some more about exactly what kind of recommendations we want to be putting out. And we're moving towards, I think, towards the position that we want to recommend that the SRO, whether we want to, that we're talking about whether we want to take the position of recommending a sort of reauthorization of the SRO position, or whether we want to just recommend that the SRO no longer exists. And I think we're moving in the latter direction. Feel free to correct me on that, fellow subcommittee members. But we've been having really active and productive conversations over the last few weeks.
If I could just add, because this happened after our meeting, I had a really fruitful conversation with them. The curriculum coordinator, K-12, health and wellness. And mostly that was because where we see the middle school SROs is through that. And so it was really precipitated. I am not just professionals, whether I'm friends with her, and the middle school teacher who came to our meeting, Katie Goldring, had let her know, like, hey, I went to that SRO meeting and talked about it. And so she and I had a great conversation, but she also pointed to more things around for us to examine around middle school. And I plan to share that more with the group. But I think a lot of it had to do with less like direct instruction, which is, I think, at least where I was sort of pursuing, like why are police teaching, so to speak, as opposed to, I think Kim said eloquently, like it's not career day. It's not like, bicycle safety. It's things like, stuff that I'm just confused why police would be there to teach that stuff to our children. This is more about administrational connection, which I don't know where I feel, honestly. Like, I mean, it's similar in its problematicness for me, that like perhaps adults see the police as real resources, but do the families and children really see that? And that's unclear to me. And so I know I've been the biggest one to be like, no, we have to write the paper and stop researching, but this is one more stone I feel like I have to unturn and get a sense of what in particular the adults in middle schools are feeling, as opposed to their role in front of children. Like, how are people feeling about that?
Thank you. Any questions here?
I have a quick question. I'm sorry. Did I just talk out of turn?
No, go ahead. You're up.
Okay. When did the SRO program start? And forgive me if you've already said that.
So that's a bit complicated. In its official like signed memorandum of understanding, not until February of 2019. However, in my opinion, there's been a lot of moving targets. That same SRO was already in the building in the fall of 2018, as well as we found out on the Monday before Thanksgiving that there wasn't one SRO, there are now 4 SROs. And we were wondering how that happened. We got a quick explanation from Officer Hatchett, or Sergeant Hatchett, sorry. And we got a quick explanation of that, but it wasn't fulfilling, I guess, for lack of a better term. It was more, well, they're already doing these in schools and we kind of renamed the officers. That was the quick explanation.
Because I have some vague memory, and this is how my head's working this week. Everything's a vague memory. But I think, Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, and it may have been from Mr. Baronis, but there was talk with somebody earlier this week about the police department sending an officer into the high school to teach a course around the same time as Walk and Talk. Am I completely misremembering this?
No, you asked me about how the Walk and Talk program got started and what was the, I don't know, what was the background? And I had told you about Chief Samad, and I said that Chief Samad was what a lot of people, myself included, consider was a progressive chief. I said, if you remember correctly, when we talked about the SRO program back in the late 80s, he was the chief at the time when the detective Jocelyn Murphy went in to teach at the Brookline High School to teach the course. That's how it came about.
Okay, right. Thank you. So, but it wasn't an SRO program then specifically, but it was around that time that the Walk and Talk started that the Brookline Police Department started having officers go into the schools to create connections. Is that accurate?
Well, she went in to teach, and I think it was at a legal studies classes that she spoke at. I remember growing up, we always had officers come in the beginning of the school to talk about our school safety. And other than that, I think the first time I remember them getting in the school to actually teach a class was when Jocelyn went in there. And that was 88, 87, 88, something like that.
Chief,
So
just to
around the
confirm, this is the same Jocelyn Murphy that's now town council?
Yes.
I want to be really clear. The legal studies program, I mean, she was not teaching in that. She was guest speaker. She would come in and do things, but it wasn't her class. It was Bert Skaversky's class. He's the one who created the program.
It was not her class.
And my sister was in the program.
Well, if I led you to believe that it was her class, I'm mistaken. It's not her class.
I mean, what would certify her to teach a class like full time and work on the police and be there 4 days a week when class met? I think that's incredibly deceiving.
I didn't mean to insinuate that she taught the entire course.
Okay.
If you got that impression, I'm wrong.
So how much of the course are you saying she taught? I
don't know.
Okay.
But I know she was in there teaching, and that she was able to develop a relationship with the schools. And they were calling on her to come in to deal with certain things after that.
And we can certainly ask her that if that's an area of interest for folks. We can ask her that directly. Alexander, were you going to say something?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Thanks, though.
No problem. Anyone else here? Okay, let us then move on to envisioning and community engagement.
Yeah, I'll get us started and then other folks join in. And I think our update briefly is very similar to ones that earlier subcommittees have given. We're in the stages of drafting together, written out an outline, assigning portions of our ultimate report to different folks on the subcommittee, and then we'll be working together on the timeline for public hearing. two things that I wanted to follow up on. One of them is to say we heard you, Raul, during our last update in making sure that we reach out to other community groups. We have some interviews scheduled for tomorrow morning and then also for Monday, kind of giving us an opportunity to pilot our work around the going small idea. Part of the things that we're hoping will come out of that is the ability for us to surface a list of folks whose insight and expertise we may be missing out on when it comes to conversations about policing and public safety, to ensure that the town would come out of those conversations with a clearer sense of who aren't we talking to that we might need to be talking to in the eyes of other folks in the community. So again, we heard you on that guidance during our last task force update. And the second thing is just wanted to make an appeal to the other subcommittees. Part of the way that we've structured the outline, at least so far, is wanting to make sure we lift up ideas around community engagement that have surfaced in other subcommittees. And so if there's an opportunity then for you to share back with me or other members of the community engagement subcommittee, there were things that we discussed. I think, Anne, you've mentioned them a number of times, but there are things that were discussed in other subcommittees that have implications for the path forward for effective community engagement. We want to make sure that we get those things from your subcommittee meetings and brought forward. And we have a section that's earmarked for themes that have come from other subcommittees. So let me make space for Eitan, Chi-Chi, or Bonnie if there's anything else you want to add.
Kristen, first of all, thank you for all your leadership on this committee and getting us started on report and these small group conversations. I know you shared the outline, and I apologize that I haven't really had a chance to read it, think through it, and provide feedback. I've been working on the community, the departmental analysis report, but once that's finalized, we'll turn to this. But I've been still thinking about the relationship of the survey report to our report. And, you know, Eitan at the last meeting mentioned that his report will be appended to the final task force report, and that, you know, different subcommittees should take parts of that and include it in their own report, which makes eminent sense. The thing I was thinking about, and I haven't had a chance to do, is to review your previous presentation and figure out how much of at least what was in the slides, not having the draft report, is sort of plug-inable to to the other subcommittees like SRO and walk and talk, and how much of it is sort of more general, and there should be some sort of summary in our subcommittee's report, because I mean the reality is sometimes reports people read the bulk and not all the appendices. And so, you know, whether it's just part of the executive summary repeated in our section, in our section of the final report, it's just something I've been thinking about. And I'd love to hear Eitan's thoughts about that and your thoughts about that, Kristen.
Yeah, I'll just say quickly that we did hold some space for Eitan in the outline to do what you just described, Chi-Chi. I know that there's a lot of work that you and Eitan are doing across other subcommittee work, but to explicitly lift up the things that came from the survey that have implications for the work we are trying to do for community engagement, and make sure that we thoughtfully integrate that thinking into our report. But I'll let Eitan take it from there.
I mean, you know, I guess it's worth thinking about where are the holes in the survey data. Is that, I mean, you know, and I think that it was a good thought that, you know, to kind of pull out some of the open-ended responses. I think we'll see in those open-ended responses positive and negative experiences. You know, I think that, you know, a lot of people had positive experiences to share across across all cohorts, and that's great. A lot of people have had really positive relationships with the police department, and we've had negative ones. And, I guess to me, the biggest asset of the survey is actually focused on the stuff that's town-wide. That, in other words, I think we do see some experiences reflected of course, African American Latino respondents, but we also see a quite widespread recognition of a problem and call for a solution. So I think on the particulars, I mean, we could incorporate more of the details, particularly coming from communities of color, in the community engagement report. I don't have clear thoughts on this. What do you recommend, Chi-Chi? Or
well, I mean, why don't you write your report, and I'm happy to review it and maybe figure out what from your report we should include in the community engagement and envisioning subcommittee report, sort of what, whether it's just a simple lifting parts of the executive summary, whether it's more than that, really need to see the report before we can figure it out. But I don't want to lose some of the really important aspects of your report because all of it's in the appendix. I want, lift some of it up, and this may be the most appropriate subcommittee because the other ones are more particular. And also, I've almost done the departmental analysis report, so I don't want to make too many more changes to that one.
Yeah, and I don't think it'll be hard. Yeah, sorry, Kristen.
I just wanted to say quickly, I guess for the people that are viewing this either live as attendees and then also maybe recording this, watching the recording of this, I guess I have a concern that the intent here is not to write a report that says what's wrong. I think or not exclusively write a report that says what's wrong. If there are things that are working well about community engagement that the survey helps unearth, we want to make sure that those things are included. And personally, I feel like the hope is that we can say what's working, where do we want to be, and how can we even be even better? Not just to make it purely an indictment. And I'm just concerned that that's the framing that is an indictment.
Yeah, I'll just say I think it's really important. I'm thinking about people reading this report 20 years later, and I want them to understand, as much context as possible of, how we engage in our work, the challenges, in particular, to getting, feedback, the role the survey played in that, the role other forms of engagement played in that, and, for folks to really understand that exactly how hard it is to do this, and how difficult, particularly during the pandemic. We certainly need to recognize the challenges that we faced in. We can't just set up shop, whether it be, in somewhere in public housing or elsewhere, to just have people come and talk to us directly. The challenges that we've really faced in doing that. The other part I'll say about the survey itself is, the way that I envision the report is that while the full report may live in the appendix, its findings should live throughout. If there are, every subcommittee should be thinking about what in there should be incorporated into our part of the report, and pulling that out as needed. If you need some support on that, I'm sure Eitan would be happy to help. But that's something for each subcommittee to think about. What makes sense to include in our part? And there's no question that in the executive summary and the lead up to the recommendations, again, among other things, my view is executive summary, here are recommendations, and here are all the subcommittee reports that support these recommendations. So in the lead up to those recommendations, that first salvo where we share those recommendations, it's going to be important to reference the fact that these recommendations that we're producing are widely supported by the community, as far as we can tell from this community-wide survey that we engaged in, as well as other forms of community engagement. And as I said in response to Chief O'Leary earlier, some support for various programs notwithstanding, right? The idea that it's not everything good or everything bad. There's works for some, doesn't work for others, and where we've found that programs don't work for others in a way that make them problematic, we have recommendations about how to make changes there. So anyway, I don't know I hope that gets at some of the questions that folks are raising about this, but I want to make sure that each subcommittee has an opportunity to review the report after we get the final report next Friday and pull out what makes sense to them. Also in sort of pulling together the full final report, there may be some redundancies that are fine, and there may be other redundancies that are overly redundant. And so we'll see what that looks like, and the degree to which editing may need to take place, so that we're not providing the same facts 5 times during the very same report.
I'll just say, you don't really have to wait for me in the sense that, the PowerPoint or whatever, the slides that I made a couple weeks ago, I can tell you, I redid all the analysis already based on the updated data, but the percentages are all roughly the same as in that presentation, and the structure, of like what the analyses are all the same. So there's not going to be any surprises in the report that are different from the slides.
Right. So you may be able to put whatever numbers you want or findings you want in your own subcommittee reports, and then just make sure you update them after we get the final report, in case those numbers have changed by a percentage point or something like that. We want to reflect is that right? That makes sense, Azon? That's
right. Or just to see you don't have to fill out the numbers out, but you can see what, the questions, the crosstabs, we see, for example, with the community engagement that, African Americans in the town who respond to the survey have a lot more exposure to the police. They say that they have many, many, many more interactions with the police. They report crime at a higher rate. They know how to file a complaint. Of all the racial subgroups, African Americans, the only one for whom the majority of respondents said they know how to file a complaint. And yet they also are the least likely to say they would go to the police if they needed help with something. So we have a sense of, for example, for African Americans in the community, as represented in the survey, just in the data I already presented, which is still going to be reflected in the survey, we have a kind of a portrait of what's going on by racial groups. So you can kind of think through the structure of the questions that we were able to get from the survey and the responses for any subcommittee, already.
If I could just chime in, because I think this all links. I've been pretty clear trying to think about kids and keeping kids occupied in safe, healthy ways as a form of public safety. And so I had a really good meeting with the new leader for the Brookline Teen Center, Alicia Adamson. And I mentioned this because she mentioned a lot of things in her quick entry during COVID, as well as other things. But the Brookline Teen Center, while it is for all Brookline children, serves mostly children of color. And so, I'm thinking about what Christian said earlier, right? And there are, police officers dedicated to trying to build community through the teen center. She spoke pretty eloquently about some real needs that I want to express in this report in terms of helping the teen center, and particularly around mental health services as well as social work services that they just don't have. And the teen center is a funky entity. It's not truly a town entity in the sense of it's not under town government or town funding. However, we should be thinking about, this is another avenue to provide public safety for the town as well as the kids who use the service of the Brookline Teen Center. And so we're going to have more to talk about, and I'll share more in our next meeting. But it was a very interesting conversation with her in terms of thinking of kids, what kids need, and how that can provide public safety for the entire community.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's really important. Yeah, please bring that in. And I know that in some of our recommendations, we've been talking about driving toward this potential social service agency model and making sure that it meets the needs of our sort of existing outside of our government structure organizations like the Teen Center and Steps to Success and the Brookline Center, and the list goes on. The needs of those groups is going to be really important to understand. So yeah, please bring that in. Thanks, Malcolm. Anything else here? All right. Keep on working, folks. Next up, Departmental Analysis Subcommittee.
We're on track to have our public meeting this coming week. Our report is essentially ready for public display. Actually, Chi-Chi, do we have a final link? I don't think that's included in the.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for just a final thumbs up from one of our subcommittee members. So thank you everyone on the task force who provided input on the draft report and filled out the Google form or emailed me. I have tried to incorporate that feedback in the draft report. Right now there's a red line version. You can actually see it. I can put the link in the chat. Once the entire subcommittee is signed off, I will finalize that. And then a clean copy can be posted and shared, and including shared to whatever website where the public hearing is being posted.
Good. So yeah, so I sent the agenda and meeting announcement to Devin, which is, by the way, for Wednesday at 3 o'clock. But I guess so hopefully Devin can help us just get it to the right place. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I think we're ready to rock on the public hearing, or we will be soon. Thank you. Anyone else?
I just want to say a few words about what's been going on in this meeting, and just some of the interactions. But before I do that, I just want to, Raul, if we need to close out any of the logistical stuff here, or Raul had something to say.
Great. Yeah, let's do that. Let's close this out. I am taking note right now. As far as I can tell, we have subcommittee public hearings that we've scheduled and will go out to the public January 27th next week. That's the Departmental Analysis Subcommittee that'll have sort of a presentation and receive public feedback on that. The School Resource Officer Subcommittee will do the same thing on February 2nd, the week after. And the Vulnerable People and People in Crisis Subcommittee will be having theirs on February 4th. Let me see if, what about walk and talk?
Yeah, that will probably be the second.
That'll also be the second?
Or no, I'm sorry, the third.
The third, okay.
2 weeks from last Wednesday, so the third, right?
Okay.
That's, I mean, it's tentative, but.
Okay, got it. So 2 Wednesdays from now, got it. All right, that's good. All right. So, a couple of things I just want to say about this is one is I like the idea of putting these all in sort of one cogent email where we can say, hey, here's where we are in our work. We have upcoming subcommittee hearings. Devin, maybe you and I can work offline on an email that will, or like a notice that will go out. Is that good with you, Devin?
Yes. Yep, I had two thoughts on that. We can put together a graphic with all of the public hearing dates that can go on social and on the website, but then we can also use the notify me feature through the website, which has about 100 subscribers for the task force emails, and then just send out one notify me with all of the public hearing dates.
Great. And we can all forward that to folks. Great. The other thing I wanted to reiterate, although I mentioned it at a previous meeting, is that be sure to send invites to folks that you think will be able to provide, again, critical feedback that are going to make these recommendations better. So we talked about it, for instance, and I know they're already doing this because I was in their subcommittee meeting, the vulnerable people and people in crisis. They've got a list of folks to say, here are some of the people that we've talked to already. We want to invite them to see sort of the product of our work and their participation in that work. That includes people in the police department, at the Brookline Center, and elsewhere, right? And so every subcommittee that's going to be having a public hearing should be doing something similar. Who are the people that are going to help provide, really important feedback based on their own expertise? And, in particular, I do want to make sure that we, to the extent possible, those groups that are impacted by these, for the walk and talk one, we've talked about some of the challenges, but, inviting folks from public housing to be there for that, to share their thoughts. The school resource officer one, obviously inviting, parents and youth and members from the school department and the school committee to be there for that, I think would be appropriate. And I think you got where we're going from here. Departmental analysis, we'll figure out who the right people are to invite. Certainly, we want to invite, I think, Chief Morgan back. We want to invite, some other folks that are maybe interested in oversight work. I'd love to have Rasan Hall there from the ACLU if he's available. I know we've spoken with him, and he's got a lot of experience and insights around this kind of work. So, just remember to do that. It's not just about just sort of these blast emails or notices that are going to go out. We have to do the work to actually invite people to come in and provide us feedback. And, I'll say this now, I'll say it again. It's these public hearings are an opportunity. People will say whatever it is they want to say, but we should make it known that these are an opportunity for folks to reflect upon the work of the task force, not just their thoughts on policing, whether they be, just sort of broad thoughts on policing. People may bring in their personal experiences in letting us know why they think, a particular recommendation, meets their needs or doesn't. But broad generalizations about policing are not going to be particularly helpful to have us produce a better report. At this point. So we'll, but again, once folks have an opportunity for public comment, it's their time for public comment, and they'll be able to say whatever it is on their mind and in their hearts, and that's okay too. But I'm hopeful that folks will show up ready to, to help us improve this work. Any other questions about logistics before we go to Chi-Chi? Hearing none, Chi-Chi, you're up.
I actually left one thing out of the draft report, and it's that I'm thinking of adding a few paragraphs emphasizing why we need a civilian oversight committee for the police department. And based upon some of the conversations we've had today and earlier incidents, what has really struck me, both in the incident what happened with the walk and talk officer that Eitan asked Mel Kleckner about earlier, and also this hate mail that Raul is getting, that, there's so much resistance and sort of lack of evolution with the police department. As Bonnie mentioned earlier, there's been nothing about acknowledging what happened at the Capitol and that it was wrong, and that unfortunately there were off-duty police officers involved, and that we need to get that element out of police departments. The back and forth between Raul and Dan O'Leary about what happened with walk and talk. The mid-90s was over 20 years ago, and there's been a lot of research and writing and thought and literature. and there's just no acknowledgement. Like, yeah, maybe we thought it was a good idea in the mid-90s to have community policing and walk and talk, but we've now come to recognize that it's not. And you know, no acknowledgement of the impact of systemic racism. I think this level of sort of intransigence and resistance, I really think that is part of the reason we do need civilian oversight. If the reaction to this is just, no, you're horrible people and you just want to defund us, you know, we need a structure in place to have, to try to sort of push back and evolve the police department on that. So, you know, it's hard to capture in the context, but you know, these two incidences are something I'm going to add because I think it really does inform the need for civilian oversight.
Thanks, Chi-Chi. Mike?
I want to pick up on something that Chi-Chi just said, and it's a comment that I made. I don't know if I made it in this meeting. I know I made it in the subcommittee, that we have, I think, some pretty interesting data. The combination of the traffic analysis that we got from Todd Corain, matching that up with who gets tickets and who doesn't get tickets, citations when they're driving in Brookline, and the survey data from the Tough survey. And I think it would be very useful if we could convey that data and have a conversation about it with representatives of the police department, of the patrol officers, because when you show people information that conflicts with what they believe, sometimes they simply reject it. But some of the information that we have can be presented in a way that will be honestly very difficult to reject. How do you explain the difference in traffic enforcement in citations if you don't agree that it's biased? And so it goes back to the point that Chi-Chi was making in the beginning of her remarks, that the police department seems to have sort of circled the wagons and they're in a very defensive mode. I think the way to approach that is to sit down and have a conversation with them. And I don't know how we can arrange that, but I would, Raul, I would urge us to think about that, work with Chief O'Leary, Chief Morgan to see, and frankly, directly with the union. As hostile as their initial response to what you were saying, you and others were saying in select board might be, the only way to convince them that there's something wrong and is to have that conversation. And if you can convince them that there's something wrong, then there's an opportunity to see some change.
In that spirit, I would just say I'm happy to volunteer to do a presentation of the survey to the police union if they're interested in it, to any members of the department. If it's useful, I'm sure I can persuade Professor Schaffner to come along too, if they're interested in the survey results and in analyzing them. I think it's a good idea, and happy to do that. If I don't know how to arrange that, or if they're interested in data, but if they are, happy to help.
Well, I'll be, I've got a meeting scheduled tomorrow with the president of the police union, and we'll be sitting down to talk about a number of things, and I'm happy to have a conversation about this as well. I'm not opposed necessarily to doing this. I think we've got to get to a place, however, where where we can talk about well, first of all, an understanding of data, and one of the things that's been that's been troubling to me, and this has come up over and over again, is the lack of use of really meaningful data that's been sitting there by the police department, and a lack of understanding of it too. I think when we had a conversation last week with the interim chief, and sort of talked about the discrepancy between, like the vast discrepancy between tickets and warnings with motorists, white motorists who are caught speeding, being significantly more likely to get a warning than any other category of motorists, particularly Asian motorists. That the response was, well, we've got to look at each individual case. Well, no, we have 2,000 stops in the speeding category last year. That number of stops accounts for the one person that was mouthing off, or the one person that and that's why they got a ticket, or the one person that did this or that. So unless someone from the police department wants to go ahead and say remember, they're all stopped already. It's not like, we're not talking about people who get stopped, right? These are people who are stopped, right? Like, so it's not like, they're stopping these motorists versus those motorists. They've already stopped them. The infraction has already occurred. And it's been categorized, right? The more serious infractions, or the sort of more routine speeding infractions, have been categorized. And in those categories, we see these racial discrepancies. There is no looking at individual cases here that's going to explain it. And the lack of understanding of that simple, relatively simple, frankly, sort of way to look at data is troubling to me, because it says, well, if you don't understand how data works in that very simple way, you can wave away anything you see in a survey or something else for whatever reason. And so that's the area where I think we also, if we're going to do something like that, we also have to explain these things, because we're presenting data that to me is undeniable, that there's a discrepancy. Now, if there's some other reason why that's not based on race, why drivers of color are significantly more likely to get a ticket than white drivers, please let me know. But these looking at individual citations is not going to be helpful in that. And so anyway, Mike, go ahead.
So it's not my phrase. Somebody else said it a long time ago. Denial is not just a river in Egypt. And the only way to deal with it is to say just what you've said. Here are the numbers. Let's talk about what the numbers might mean. You have a very numbers-based, try to have a very factual conversation with people. I've had this experience myself in working with people in a manufacturing environment, a totally different sort of environment, but just the same, between labor and management, as it were. And it works if you take a very low-key, very factual approach, and you say, I don't understand this. Can you explain it to me, or explain it to yourselves? So I would encourage you to talk to the union and ask them whether it would be helpful to them. That's the way to put it. Would it be helpful to you guys to sit down and see the data that we're working with, so that we can get an understanding of it from your perspective?
Okay, thanks, Mike. Chi-Chi?
So two thoughts about this. First of all, obviously conversation is always good and communication is always good. And, I'm glad, Raul, you're having one. And I think a single conversation, though, may not be enough, which again is why we need a civilian oversight. There has to be ongoing dialogue about this. But the other thing is on data, I think there's some research out there, and other folks on this call probably know it better, that when people are confronted with data that conflicts with their held positions, they don't change their mind. They just dig in. And I don't know how you overcome that. Maybe the literature has some suggestions, but it's a well-known phenomenon. People don't change their mind. And when we see this as part of this work, that we say, here's the data, there are racial disparities in traffic stops. And we get, oh, no, well, it's because Boston. And then when we show them data, no, it's not Boston. There's still no moment of, oh, aha.
But it is, so you're right. That's why I say denial is not just a river in Egypt. But the way you present the information has an effect on, affects the response. So if you say, well, this data is showing me X, their response is, well, no, that's not possible. If you say, well, here's the data, what do you think this means? You get a different kind of response. People will try to think about it. They'll sort of try and justify it from their own perspectives, but that's the only, it isn't necessarily 100% successful. I certainly agree with you. People tend to hold on to their opinions in spite of data. But just the same, it does depend on how you present the data.
I think maybe there's a way to do this in which, because my concern also is posturing, is doing this as a public meeting and then, having this be some kind of PR moment for the union itself. I'm not interested in providing that platform for this union, frankly. I am interested if there was a way that, if Aton were to present this, more privately to members of the union, get their feedback on it. And to do that might be something, but providing some kind of public forum where everyone watches as we try to wrestle with the police department about the results of the survey is not, I don't know how it helps us.
This doesn't belong in a public forum. This is a discussion with it doesn't need to be a public meeting. The union is not a public body, and if you have less than a quorum of this group meeting with you, and really only 2 or 3 or 4 people sitting down with the data and saying, well, what do you think about this? If anything is going to work, it has to be that kind of conversation. To do it in a public meeting is just, you're absolutely right. That would not work at all.
It's on.
I would think they would want it. I mean, people, we just spent 15 grand or something on data about them. I mean, generally people like data about themselves and they like learning about it. So it's really an opportunity for them if they would like to ask questions and hear a presentation about what the town thinks of their work, to make sure that they have that opportunity, either on the leadership side of the police department or on the union side. You would one would think they would be interested, and for sure in not a public setting, because you want to be able to ask questions at ease.
Okay, I'll assuming the rest of the meeting goes well this weekend, I'll bring this up.
Okay.
Any other thoughts right now? I will say I'm excited. Last week sort of we talked about and sort of adopted this updated working plan. I'm excited that that all of these subcommittee hearings are fitting well within exactly where we expected them to be, February 1st through 5th, with one of them coming even earlier than that. So that's really good news. I would say and I'll just put this in the chat for everybody to see once again. Panelists and attendees, our updated sort of plan. Those subcommittee reports, the dates to finalize them are February 8th through 11th. I will say that that you can get them done earlier if you like. There's nothing preventing you from submitting them earlier, as early as possible. To get those to the task force to read and review. It is going to be very important. And I'm going to say, just like, if I can grab your attention right now, very important. As these subcommittee reports come out between meetings, for you to read them before we're in the meeting. There may be an opportunity to ask a question or two, but I'm sorry, not just read them, but to provide feedback before then. Okay, so if these draft reports are out there, the public hearings are happening, you also can provide feedback to the other subcommittees and say, hey, here's something that I think would be important to incorporate in there, or I'd like you to address. You can also provide feedback at that point in time, not necessarily in the public hearing, because we want to make room for the public to make those comments, but you can send those in, you can email those in, and Devin can help do that. I just want to make sure that, we won't have time to go through every element of every bit of every subcommittee report in our limited 2-hour meetings on Fridays. We've got other stuff to do to move us forward as well. So you got to have shown up having read the report already, if you had comments, sent those in already, and then maybe we can get some clarifications in our meetings. And my hope is that by the time we're discussing them at a Friday meeting, folks feel ready to decide whether or not they're ready to support the recommendations that are in there. There's nothing requiring you to support every recommendation you see. We can take votes if folks feel comfortable on the entire subcommittee report. But if there's something you say, I'd like to pull this out and take a separate vote on that because I'm not sure that I want to support that particular recommendation, you can do that as well. My hope is that through this process between meetings where you can provide feedback that can get incorporated, my hope would be that we get 11 task force members fully supporting the recommendations coming out of the subcommittees and then that are going to the select board. That would be my hope, but there's nothing that requires any individual task force member to have to support either a subcommittee report or an individual recommendation. So I just want to make that clear as well. Any questions about that? All right. Nell, you good? Just saying hi. All right. Good. I also want to say thank you, once again to all the staff, to Chief O'Leary and Town Administrator Mel Kleckner and our Director of the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, Community Relations, Dr. Lloyd Gelano, and Ann Braga, Director of HR, Michael Downey from Town Council's office, Transportation Administrator Todd Corain, who's a frequent visitor and has helped us out in our work too. And just all the work that staff have done to support the work of this task force, as well as all the volunteers that continue to do this work. I know we're at that point right now where it's like, wow, we've been doing this for a while. I hope that you can see some light at the March 2nd end of the tunnel. We know that this work is going to have to continue after March 2nd, that won't be the end of it. Some of us will continue along for that ride. Others that may need to move on to other things, we'll make sure to celebrate your service, that you've given to the town so far. But this is really important work. And it doesn't come without, without a little bit of sacrifice, for us all personally. In time for sure, but also in our emotional energy and some of the things that members of the task force have had to deal with along the way. So I just want to recognize that. I was writing to one of the members of the task force, I think yesterday. I can't wait to more formally celebrate all the work that you've done. So thank you everybody for what you're doing, and we'll meet again next week. See you soon.